The noon sun bore down mercilessly on the camp, baking the dirt until it seemed to shimmer underfoot. Rows of canvas tents stretched in uneven lines, their flaps fluttering weakly in the dry breeze. Beyond the camp, the hills stood silent and watchful, their shadows swallowing secrets no one dared to guess at. A formation of soldiers waited in the parade yard, boots planted firmly in the dust, rifles slung at their sides. Sweat ran freely down faces and necks, yet no one dared move or complain. They knew the general was coming. When General Harris emerged from the command tent, the murmurs ceased instantly. He walked with authority, carved into every step, his boots crunching across gravel. His chest bore ribbons and medals from a career of battles that stretched across continents. He was a man who never smiled without purpose, who measured every word as if it weighed lives. His presence alone demanded silence, but when his gaze swept the yard, the stillness grew even heavier. "Men," he said, his voice booming across the camp. "We face a matter that requires courage. I need a volunteer." The words dropped into the air like stones into a pond, sending invisible ripples through the crowd. No one spoke, but the shift was felt in the tightening of jaws, the stiffening of shoulders. Soldiers exchanged quick glances before fixing their eyes forward again, as if afraid that even looking at their neighbor might mark them as weak. The general's tone carried no explanation, but they all understood what it meant. The assignment would be dangerous, perhaps even fatal. The silence stretched on. Harris led it, his hands clasped behind his back, his chin raised. He studied the rows of young men, hardened faces baked by sun and fear. Some soldiers shifted their weight subtly, boots grinding on gravel, but none stepped forward. The air grew hotter with each passing second, as though the earth itself disapproved of their hesitation. At the edge of the formation, near the supply tent, a man bent over a clipboard. He wore the same standard-issue uniform as the others, but his shirt clung loosely to his frame, and the absence of rank insignia made him nearly invisible. A pair of spectacles slid down the bridge of his nose as he scribbled notes onto a manifest sheet, the sound of pencil scratching faint beneath. The heavy silence of the parade ground. This was Private Daniels, the clerk. Most of the soldiers barely noticed Daniels. He was the man who ensured their rations were accounted for, that the right number of boots came in supply shipments, that their paperwork reached headquarters. In the hierarchy of camp life, he was a background figure, a ghost who lived in ink and forms. He ate quietly, spoke little, and carried himself like a man who preferred shadows to sunlight. If asked, the others would have said he wasn't soldier material, just another bureaucrat thrown into uniform. Yet as the general's words echoed, Daniels lifted his head. His dark eyes, sharp behind the glass lenses, scanned the line of men. He saw strong jaws locked in fear, fists clenched behind rigid backs. No one moved. He straightened slowly, pressing the pencil behind his ear. General Harris frowned at the motionless formation. "So," he said, his tone sharpening, "none among you has the spine? None willing to step forward?" His voice thundered, cutting into the still air. "This is not an errand. This is service. This is the duty you swore when you put on this uniform. I ask once more, who among you will volunteer?" A bead of sweat rolled down a young private's cheek, but he held firm. The men were caught in an invisible grip, their courage tested not by gunfire, but by silence. In the back of the ranks, a throat cleared nervously, then fell quiet again. And then, from the side, a single figure moved out. It wasn't one of the broad-shouldered riflemen in the front row. It wasn't one of the hardened corporals with battle scars etched across their faces. It was Daniels, the paperwork clerk. He placed his clipboard carefully on a supply crate, straightened his glasses, and stepped forward. The murmurs began instantly, soft at first, then louder, sweeping the formation like wildfire. Heads turned, eyes widened. Soldiers who had never spared Daniels a second thought now stared as though seeing him for the first time. Daniels walked with quiet assurance. His steps were measured, steady, the rhythm of a man unbothered by fear or spectacle. When he reached the open space before the general, he stopped and stood at attention. "I'll volunteer, sir," he said, his voice calm but clear enough to carry across the yard. The silence that followed was almost physical. Soldiers blinked, unsure if they had heard correctly. General Harris tilted his head, eyes narrowing as he studied the thin-framed clerk before him. His jaw tightened, and then slowly he began to circle Daniels, inspecting him as one might a curious animal. "You," the general said finally, his tone dripping with disbelief. "Private Daniels, the man who files requisition forms and counts boots." "You volunteer?" "Yes, sir." No hesitation, no trembling in his voice. A chuckle rippled through the ranks, uneasy and mocking. A few soldiers smirked, shaking their heads, but the general didn't laugh. He continued to study Daniels, his eyes probing for a crack in the clerk's calm demeanor. Yet Daniels' face remained unflinching, his gaze forward, his posture rigid. General Harris stopped in front of him, standing close enough for Daniels to smell the leather polish on his belt. "Do you have any idea," the general asked quietly, "what you're volunteering for?" Daniels didn't blink. "No, sir. But I'll do it." The camp seemed to lean forward, as though waiting for the general to unleash fury, to humiliate. The man who dared step forward when braver men did not. But instead, Harris simply stared. Something in Daniels' voice, in his calm defiance, unsettled him. The silence broke when a veteran sergeant in the formation muttered under his breath, "Clerk's lost his damn mind." Laughter rippled nervously again, but quickly died under the general's sharp glare. Daniels stood alone, yet unshaken. He didn't fidget, didn't glance nervously at the watching eyes. He only adjusted his glasses once and waited. The general finally spoke again, louder this time, so every man heard. "Very well. If Private Daniels wishes to prove himself, let him." His eyes swept the ranks, daring another man to laugh. "And let the rest of you remember this moment. When called upon, the quietest man among you found his courage before the rest." The soldiers stiffened, shame creeping through the lines. Daniels remained still, his face unreadable, and in that blazing afternoon, under the sun's harsh glare, the first thread of a legend was woven. The general had asked for a volunteer, and against all expectation, it was not the boldest, nor the strongest, nor the loudest who stepped forward. It was the man no one noticed, the quiet clerk, who suddenly stood taller than them all. Asterisk, the yard was still trembling with shock. Private Daniels stood in the open space before General Harris, his thin figure outlined sharply against the blazing afternoon sun. The murmurs that had erupted from the ranks had not yet settled, spreading in waves of disbelief and laughter across the line of soldiers. Men who had faced artillery fire, ambushes, and endless nights of patrol now whispered like schoolboys. Confronted with something impossible, the clerk, the quiet man who kept to himself and shuffled papers in the supply tent. He was the one who had volunteered. General Harris said nothing at first. His piercing eyes swept over Daniels, traveling from the scuffed boots up to the plain spectacles perched on his nose. The general was a man who had fought battles on 3 continents, who had seen bravery and cowardice in equal measure. But this he hadn't expected. He stepped closer, circling Daniels like a predator considering prey. "You, Harris," said finally, his voice deep and incredulous. "Private Daniels, the man whose greatest weapon is a pencil." He paused, letting the words hang in the air, thick with disdain. "You're telling me you want to volunteer for this mission?" "Yes, sir," Daniels replied, steady. The certainty in his tone startled the men listening. Not only had he stepped forward, but he had done so without hesitation. Most soldiers, when speaking to Harris, shifted nervously, stumbled over words, or tried to guess what answer he wanted. Daniels offered none of that. His voice was calm, quiet, and absolutely certain. The general narrowed his eyes. He wasn't a man easily impressed, but there was something about that answer, something unsettling. He tilted his head. "Do you know what I'm asking, Private? Do you have the faintest idea what danger lies ahead?" "No, sir," Daniels said again, without blinking. "But I'll do it." A ripple of nervous laughter burst from the formation, sharp and mocking. One of the corporals snorted, whispering to the man beside him, "He'll be dead before sundown." A few others chuckled. Laughter in Harris's presence was rare, dangerous even, but this was too absurd to ignore. Harris wheeled suddenly on the ranks. His eyes flared like fire. "Silence," he thundered. The laughter died instantly. "You think courage is a game? That this is amusing?" His voice cracked like a whip. "This man has done what none of you dared." He stepped forward. "And what did the rest of you do? You stared at your boots like cowards." The formation stiffened, shame flooding their faces. The mocking smiles vanished. Daniels didn't flinch under the weight of the general's voice. He kept his posture straight, hands by his side, expression calm. That quiet strength unsettled the men even more. They were used to soldiers boasting, loudly, talking of glory, and falling silent when danger loomed. But Daniels said nothing of glory. He simply stood, unshaken. Harris leaned closer, his voice dropping low so that only Daniels could hear. "Why did you step forward?" Daniels met his gaze. His answer was simple. "Because you asked, sir." There was no bravado, no long explanation. Just 6 words that landed with the weight of iron. The general stared at him for a long moment. Then, without warning, he barked, "Attention!" The yard snapped rigid. Harris turned and strode back toward his position, but his eyes never left Daniels. The camp buzzed with speculation that night. In the mess tent, soldiers gathered in huddles, voices hushed but urgent. "Did you see him?" one whispered. "He didn't even flinch." Another shook his head, still in disbelief. "He's crazy. He doesn't know what he's gotten himself into." "But did you see Harris's face?" a third said quietly. "He didn't laugh. Not once. He looked at him like maybe he believed him." For once, Daniels was the subject of every conversation. Men who had barely known his name now dissected his every movement, his every word, and yet Daniels himself was nowhere to be found. After volunteering, he had simply returned to his supply tent, calmly finishing the paperwork he had left behind. When a young soldier peeked in, hoping to catch him bragging or boasting, Daniels was hunched over a ledger, pencil scratching steadily across the page. "Private?" the young man asked hesitantly. Daniels looked up, eyes calm behind his glasses. "Yes?" Nothing," the soldier muttered, backing away. There was nothing more to say. Later that evening, General Harris sat alone in his quarters, the lantern casting shadows across the wooden desk. He poured a measure of whiskey, the glass trembling slightly in his hand. He replayed the moment again and again, the clerk's voice steady, unafraid, the way he had stepped forward without hesitation. Harris had seen bravado before. He had seen men shout loudly, only to collapse when real danger struck. But Daniels was different. There was no pride in his words, no arrogance in his eyes. Just certainty, and certainty was rare. The general set the glass down. He would test this man, not because he believed in him, but because something in him demanded to be tested. Harris was too old, too scarred by war, to trust appearances. He needed proof. At the same time, in the barracks, The whispers continued. Some called Daniels a fool. Others called him brave. But no one ignored him anymore. One private muttered bitterly, "I hope he fails. Shows him for what he is." But another shook his head. "No, didn't you see how he stood there? Like he wasn't afraid at all. I've seen men freeze just standing near Harris. But him? Not even a blink. That silence, that composure, gnawed at them all. For Daniels, though, nothing seemed changed. He ate his dinner alone, as always, pushing the beans around his tin plate with calm indifference. If he felt the weight of the eyes watching him, he didn't show it. If he knew the laughter, the doubt, the whispers, he gave no sign. He had stepped forward. That was enough. By the time the lanterns dimmed and the camp fell quiet, only the general remained awake, sitting at his desk, staring into the flame. Tomorrow, he decided, he would act. Tomorrow, he would find out what kind of man this quiet clerk truly was. And in the silence of that night, a storm of expectation brewed. For the soldiers, it was disbelief turned into rumor. For the general, it was curiosity sharpened into intent. And for Daniels, it was nothing more than another night one step closer to a test he already seemed ready to face. The stage was set. The clerk had volunteered. The general would not let it end there. The dawn sky was pale, tinged with streaks of orange and gold as the soldiers assembled in the yard. The previous day's shock still lingered in the air, a tension that no one could shake. Even those who had dismissed Daniel's volunteerism as foolish now glanced nervously toward the thin, spectacled clerk as he approached the center of the yard. General Harris emerged from the command tent with his usual aura of authority, but there was a subtle edge to his movements today, a combination of disbelief and curiosity. He had watched Daniels for hours, trying to discern weakness, some hint of panic beneath the calm exterior. And yet, he had found nothing. Nothing. "Private Daniels?" Harris barked, his voice echoing across the still yard. "I told you yesterday that volunteering would require courage. Today, you will prove it." Daniels nodded, expression neutral. His spectacles caught the first light of morning, reflecting it back like two calm, unwavering orbs. He stepped forward without hesitation. Placing his hands loosely at his sides, Harris drew a pistol from its holster, the metallic click slicing the morning air. Gasps rippled across the formation. Soldiers instinctively tightened their grips on rifles, eyes wide. This was not a rehearsal. This was not a staged demonstration. This was the test, and it was real. "Do you know what this is, Private?" Harris said, leveling the weapon at Daniel's chest. "One wrong move, and it's over. You understand that, yes?" "Yes, sir," Daniels replied calmly. His voice carried across the yard without a tremor. The general circled him slowly, watching for any sign of hesitation. Every muscle in Daniel's face was still, his breathing controlled. Harris stopped in front of him, pistol raised, and leaned in close. "Are you certain you want to continue? There is no turning back once I give the signal." Daniel's eyes met Harris steadily. "I am certain, sir." A ripple of disbelief spread through the soldiers. Many had faced live fire drills before, some even real combat, but none had seen such composure from a man so clearly untested. Some whispered, "He must be crazy." Others murmured, "He's calm, almost too calm." Harris' fingers tightened on the pistol. He lifted it to eye level, testing Daniel's reaction. And then, without warning, he lunged forward. Daniels reacted as if the move had been expected all along. In one fluid motion, faster than the eye could follow, he twisted the general's wrist, forcing the pistol downward. A sharp crack echoed through the yard as the general stumbled, thrown off balance by the clerk's precise maneuver. Silence Then the metallic clatter of the pistol hitting the gravel. Every soldier froze. Mouths hung open, eyes widened. Some instinctively took a step back, unsure whether to intervene or flee. None did. Daniels stood perfectly still, calm as ever. His glasses had shifted slightly on his nose, but he did not adjust them. The pencil-thin clerk, the man who had shuffled papers quietly in the supply tent, had just dropped the most powerful officer in the camp in a single move. The general, sprawled on the ground, blinked in stunned disbelief. He pressed a hand to the dirt and slowly rose, brushing off his uniform. His jaw was tight, muscles working under his skin. He had not expected this, not from Daniels, not from anyone. Yet here he was, weaponless, facing a clerk whose skill had rendered him momentarily powerless. A soldier muttered, almost under his breath, "He didn't just do that." He disarmed the general. Whispers began to ripple through the ranks, disbelief growing into awe. "Did you see that?" one said. He moved like lightning. Daniels simply stood, expression neutral, hands by his side, as if he had just filed another requisition form, rather than vested the general in a demonstration of pure skill. His calm made the yard feel strangely silent, almost sacred, like time had stopped. The general finally straightened completely, face flushed with a mix of anger, pride, and shock. "Stand at ease," he said, voice low, measured, and grudgingly respectful. "Private Daniels, you may have just proved something most men in this camp could not." Daniels inclined his head slightly. "Thank you, sir." Harris rubbed his wrist absently, still processing the unexpected turn of events. He had underestimated Daniels, judged him based on appearances, and been proven wrong in the most spectacular fashion. He had faced warlords and trained soldiers, yet the quiet clerk had displayed a mastery he hadn't anticipated. The soldiers stared, collectively silent. Some gawked, others exchanged whispered conversations. One sergeant muttered, shaking his head, "I've seen every kind of soldier, but never someone like him. He's different." The general straightened, voice carrying across the yard. "Let this be a lesson. Courage is not measured in volume or muscle. Sometimes it comes in quiet form. Sometimes it comes in the least expected package." His eyes lingered on Daniels, a grudging acknowledgement passing over his features. "Private, you will join the mission, not because I trust you blindly, but because you have proven more than words ever could." Daniels inclined his head again, calm, steady. He didn't smile, didn't boast. He simply acknowledged the words. Later, as the soldiers returned to their routines, the whispers continued, growing louder, spreading faster than wildfire. "The clerk did it," one said. "The clerk dropped the general." Another added, "I thought he was just a pencil pusher. Turns out he's a weapon in disguise." Daniels walked back toward the supply tent, still calm, still quiet. He passed soldiers who stared in awe, some shaking their heads in disbelief. Some wanted to approach him, to ask how he had done it, but none dared. The man had become untouchable, in reputation and skill, even before the mission had begun. General Harris watched him from a distance, still brushing off dirt, still processing what had just happened. He had faced countless surprises in his career, but this had shaken him in a way few things could. The general had been humbled, not by strategy, not by numbers, but by a man no one had thought capable of action. Harris spoke quietly to himself. The quietest man in camp might just be the strongest. That evening, the campfire burned brighter than usual. Soldiers gathered in small clusters, recounting the event again and again. Each retelling grew. More dramatic, more exaggerated, but the core remained the same. Private Daniels, the clerk, had stood calmly, disarmed the general in one fluid motion, and walked away as though nothing had happened. One young private shook his head, disbelief etched on his face. He didn't even flinch. A veteran nearby nodded slowly. And that's why he's going with the mission. He's calm. He's precise. And apparently, he's deadly. Daniels, meanwhile, returned to his tent quietly, removed his glasses, and wiped the sweat from his brow. To him, it was just another day. Yet for the soldiers and the general, the image would linger for years. A thin, quiet man standing calmly in the center of the yard, disarming the most powerful man in the camp with a single, astonishing move. By nightfall, the story had reached every corner of the outpost. Soldiers spoke in hushed tones, some in awe, others in fear. The general, still recovering from the surprise, made his rounds slowly, silently observing Daniels at work. The clerk filed paperwork, adjusted supplies, and moved about the camp with the same quiet efficiency he always had, unaware or deliberately. Ignoring the legend he had just begun to forge. In the shadows, Daniels paused for a moment, looking toward the hills beyond the camp. He did not speak. He did not smile. But in that quiet reflection, there was a sense of readiness, of purpose. He knew the mission ahead would demand more than skill. It would demand courage in every form. And he was prepared. For the soldiers, for the camp, and even for General Harris, the lesson was clear. Appearances could be deceiving. Strength did not always roar. Sometimes it whispered, and when it struck with precision and force that left everyone stunned. And so, the clerk's legend was born, not with fanfare, not with medals, but with a single extraordinary act that would be remembered long after the dust had settled and the camp had quieted once more. The clatter of the fallen pistol echoed in the yard long after the movement had ended. Soldiers remained frozen, eyes wide, breaths held in disbelief. No one had expected what they had just witnessed. Private Daniels, the unassuming clerk who spent his days hunched over forms, had disarmed General Harris in one smooth, lightning-fast motion, leaving the general sprawled on the gravel. The air was thick, heavy with the smell of dust and sweat and the metallic tang of adrenaline. Whispers began immediately, low at first, crawling like shadows across the yard. "Did you see that?" one soldier asked, voice barely audible. "I thought I imagined it." "You didn't," another said, shaking his head. "He moved like lightning." Some soldiers laughed nervously, trying to dispel the shock, but their eyes kept darting back to Daniels. Even the boldest among them, those who had faced ambushes and gunfire, felt an unfamiliar tremor in their chests. This was something else. Entirely. Daniels stood calm, adjusting his glasses without a hint of pride or satisfaction. To him, nothing extraordinary had occurred. He had reacted as he always did, precise, calculated, measured. The pencil-thin clerk had no desire for glory, only to meet the challenge presented. And yet, the soldiers could not take their eyes off him. General Harris rose slowly, brushing dust from his uniform, his expression a complicated mix of anger, surprise, and something else he rarely admitted: respect. He was not accustomed to being humbled, even momentarily, and certainly not by a man he had always considered insignificant. "Stand at ease," Harris said finally, voice carrying authority, tempered by caution. He looked directly at Daniels. "Private Daniels, I would be lying if I said I expected that from you. You have skills I did not anticipate." Daniels inclined his head slightly. "Thank you, sir," he replied calmly, as if the conversation were routine. The general's gaze swept the formation, lingering on soldiers whose expressions had shifted from smug confidence to disbelief. "Let this be a lesson," he said, voice now measured, carrying a weight that silenced all murmurs. "Courage is not loud. Strength is not always obvious. Sometimes it appears in the least expected form." The soldiers exchanged glances. silently acknowledging that this was a moment none of them would forget. Even the veterans who had fought in countless skirmishes whispered among themselves. "I've never seen anything like that," one admitted, "and neither has anyone else, I think." By midday, the news had spread like wildfire. Campfires, mess halls, and tents buzzed with the story of the clerk who had bested the general. Soldiers repeated the tale, exaggerating slightly with each retelling. Each time, Daniel's calm precision was highlighted, a symbol of quiet, undeniable strength. In the supply tent, Daniels resumed his work as if nothing had happened. Pencil scratched across paper, orders were checked, manifests were recorded. Men passed by, staring in awe, some stepping closer, daring a glimpse at the man who had just become a living legend in their eyes. He did not react to their stares. He did not offer explanations or stories. He merely worked, meticulous and exact, performing the same tasks he always had. Even General Harris found himself compelled to observe Daniels from afar. He walked among the soldiers, making rounds, his thoughts restless. The wrist he had twisted during the demonstration ached slightly, a subtle reminder of the clerk's extraordinary skill. Harris had spent decades assessing men, predicting their actions, and yet he had been entirely unprepared for Daniels. The realization was unsettling. During the evening briefing, Harris addressed the soldiers, his tone firm but carrying a quiet edge of respect. "Private Daniels will accompany the mission," he announced. The words landed heavily in the yard. Some soldiers glanced at Daniels, who remained seated, scribbling on a clipboard, completely unfazed. Others whispered, "He's the one." "That's unexpected." The general continued, deliberately avoiding any praise for Daniels in public. Instead, he focused on the lesson for the camp. "Let this be a reminder," he said, voice sharp. "Courage is not measured by volume or display." Today, we witnessed that firsthand. That night, soldiers gathered near the fire, huddled together, retelling what they had seen. Some were skeptical, unwilling to believe a clerk could perform such a feat. Others were awed, discussing strategy and form, trying to dissect Daniel's technique from a single, lightning-fast motion. One young private, still shaking slightly, muttered, "I've seen every kind of soldier, but I've never seen anyone like him." A sergeant nodded slowly. "Quiet men are dangerous, boy. Don't underestimate them. I've learned that too late in my career." Meanwhile, Daniels quietly filed paperwork in the dim light of his tent. The lantern cast soft shadows across the pages, highlighting meticulous lines of neat, precise writing. He paused occasionally, adjusting his glasses, his mind calm but alert. Though outwardly serene, every nerve in his body was aware of the event's implications. He had proven his ability, but the true test was yet to come. Outside, the camp settled under a blanket of night. Stars twinkled over the hills, indifferent to the turmoil below. Soldiers lay in tents, whispering in small groups, unable to sleep fully. The camp had shifted subtly, the hierarchy temporarily disturbed by the quiet clerk who had defied expectations. Even General Harris found little rest. He replayed the events again and again in his mind. He had underestimated Daniels based on appearance and routine. He had assumed the clerk was untested, unskilled, incapable of decisive action. And yet, Daniels had proven otherwise, and the realization forced Harris to reconsider his assumptions about courage, ability, and leadership. By midnight, whispers of Daniels' deed had reached every corner of the camp. Even those far from the yard had heard the story, repeated in awe and disbelief. The clerk's reputation had grown overnight. Some soldiers approached him cautiously the next morning, asking questions. He answered briefly, never boasting, never elaborating, his calm demeanor reinforcing the impression that he was untouchable. General, watching Daniel's work quietly, finally allowed a small, private nod of acknowledgement. It was subtle, easily missed by the untrained eye, but it carried weight. Respect had been earned, not through words or ceremony, but through action. Harris understood that this man, unassuming and silent, had the potential to change the outcome of missions where ordinary soldiers might falter. For the soldiers, the lesson was clear. Appearances could deceive. Quiet men were not weak. Observant, disciplined, and measured individuals could hold power far beyond what the eye perceived. Daniels had shown that skill, courage, and composure could exist in forms that defied expectation, and he had done so without raising his voice. Without shouting, without demanding recognition. By morning, the camp's atmosphere had shifted entirely. The men were cautious, respectful, and watchful. Even those who had mocked Daniels the previous day now treated him with a subtle reverence, careful not to disrupt the calm efficiency he projected. The clerk had become a symbol, a reminder that true ability often lay hidden in plain sight. As the sun rose over the outpost, Daniels adjusted his glasses and continued his work. The camp hummed with whispered stories, soldiers glancing at him with curiosity, awe, and a touch of fear. General Harris observed silently from his tent, already planning the next phase of the mission. He knew Daniel's calm, precise skill would be indispensable, and yet he also knew that it could not be fully measured until tested under real conditions. That day, the yard remained quiet. Soldiers moved more cautiously, and whispers of Daniel's act continued to ripple through the camp. The clerk had demonstrated more than physical skill. He had changed the way every man in the camp viewed courage, respect, and the unexpected strength of quiet resolve. By the time evening fell, it was clear to all, Private Daniels was no ordinary soldier. He had proven it with one swift action, and in doing so, had transformed the perception of everyone around him. For the general, for the soldiers, and for Daniels himself, the next mission promised to be a true test, but for now, the camp rested, awestruck, aware that they had just witnessed the emergence of something extraordinary. The sun had long disappeared beyond the hills, leaving the camp cloaked in the cold silver light of a rising moon. Shadows stretched long across the tents, flitting over the dusty ground as soldiers moved quietly, completing their evening routines. The air was thick with murmurs, speculation, and disbelief. Around a crackling campfire, groups of men huddled, close, exchanging stories of what they had witnessed earlier that day. "Did you see him?" whispered Private Reynolds, eyes wide as he stared at the glowing embers. He didn't just stand his ground. He dropped the general like he weighed nothing at all. Sergeant Wilkins shook his head slowly, his lined face illuminated by firelight. "I've seen every type of soldier in my years," he said quietly, "but I've never seen someone move like that. That wasn't reflex. That was skill, precision, training, years of it." The younger soldiers exchanged glances. They had all assumed Daniels was just a clerk, a man defined by paperwork and silence. They had never considered him capable of such lethal precision. The revelation unsettled them. The man they had ignored for months or even years suddenly towered above their understanding of courage and capability. "He's different," muttered another soldier, a faint edge of fear in his voice. "I can't believe he's real." Meanwhile, Daniels himself sat a few feet away from the fire, carefully polishing the edge of a knife he kept tucked in his belt. He was calm, methodical, serene. His thin frame hunched slightly over the task, glasses catching the firelight as he moved. Around him, the whispers and glances continued, but he paid them no mind. He was not seeking recognition. He had stepped forward because it was the right thing to do. The rest, admiration, fear, legend were consequences he could neither control nor desire. From the shadows, General Harris observed silently. The firelight flickered over his stern face as he stood, leaning slightly against a tent pole. He had been through countless battles, commanded troops across continents, and witnessed heroism in its many forms. Yet Daniels had forced him to reconsider everything he thought he knew about courage. The general rubbed his wrist lightly, a faint grimace appearing as he remembered how quickly the clerk had disarmed him. Harris' thoughts were private, measured. He did not speak aloud. He merely watched Daniels, noting the calm efficiency with which he completed a simple task like sharpening a blade. The quietest man in camp, he murmured under his breath, might just be the most capable. The campfire's warmth could not reach the tension that hung over the soldiers. Many of them were still grappling with disbelief, unsure how to reconcile the image of Daniels the clerk with the man who had disarmed their general in an instant. Some whispered to one another, debating what hidden training or background he might have, though none dared ask him directly. Private Reynolds, unable to contain his curiosity, finally leaned toward Daniels. "Sir..." "Private Daniels," he stammered. Where did you learn to move like that?" Daniels paused, glancing up briefly from his blade. His dark eyes, sharp behind the lenses, met Reynolds. "Before this," he said softly, "I trained. Discipline comes before opportunity. Silence before action." He returned to polishing the knife, voice even, tone calm. That was all he offered. No story, no flourish. Just 6 simple words that only deepened the mystery. Around the fire, the men fell silent. They exchanged glances, realizing that they had glimpsed only the surface of Daniel's abilities. There was a past here, a life unspoken, experience unshared. And yet, the calm precision he displayed suggested a depth none of them could fathom. The general shifted, stepping closer to the firelight. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes betrayed the respect he had begun to feel for Daniels. He had underestimated the clerk, judged him by appearances and routine. Now, he was forced to see a man who possessed skill, courage, and focus far beyond expectation. Harris was not a man to give compliments lightly, and yet he found himself silently acknowledging Daniel's worth. The night air carried a chill, rustling through the tents and tense canvas flaps. The soldiers' whispers faded into the gentle sounds of the camp boots shifting on dirt, murmurs of the watch, the occasional crack of a tree branch outside the perimeter. Despite the calm, there was an undercurrent of excitement, a tension that hummed through the camp like electricity. The mission ahead, still unknown in its full scope, promised danger. And all knew that Daniels would play a central role. A small group of veterans gathered near the fire, exchanging opinions with a mix of admiration and caution. "I've seen men fight with rifles, with bayonets, even bare hands," said Sergeant Wilkins. "But he moves with something else. Control. Calm. Power. Quiet. That's dangerous." Another shook his head. "I don't know what to make of it. If he's that capable, why stay in the paperwork tent all this time? Why not volunteer sooner?" The fire flickered, casting moving shadows across Daniel's still figure. He heard nothing, responded to nothing, yet the soldiers sensed the quiet authority in his presence. There was no arrogance, no ego. Yet every subtle movement, every calm breath, carried the unspoken message. This man was in control. General Harris, watching from the edge of the firelight, finally broke his silence. He approached Daniels quietly, speaking in a tone meant for his ears alone. "You've proven skill and courage today," he said, voice low but deliberate. "Tomorrow, that will be tested further. I hope you understand what volunteering truly entails." Daniels looked up briefly, calm, composed, meeting the general's gaze. "I understand, sir," he said simply. Harris' jaw tightened slightly. He did not need words to convey his approval. It was written in the careful way He observed Daniel's preparation, the subtle nod, the measured pace of every movement. Respect had been earned, silently, irrevocably. Around the campfire, whispers continued, though now mixed with awe and curiosity rather than mockery. Private Daniels had become more than a clerk. He had become a symbol, a quiet man who had demonstrated the power of calm, the discipline of preparation, and the precision that few in the camp had ever seen. Some soldiers, despite themselves, began speculating about what his hidden skills might mean for the mission ahead. They imagined stealth, strategy, and deadly efficiency. They were both anxious, and relieved anxiety because the mission would be dangerous. Relief because Daniel's presence seemed to tilt the odds in their favor. The fire burned lower as the night deepened, embers glowing red. Soldiers eventually began to return to their tents, whispers fading into quiet, the weight of what had happened settling over the camp like a gentle fog. Daniels remained seated a moment longer, finishing his task with meticulous care, before rising and securing his equipment for the night. He did not boast. He did not speak of heroics. He simply moved through the camp with quiet purpose, a figure who had altered the perception of everyone around him without raising his voice. As he lay in his cot that night, the sounds of the camp softened around him. Soldiers slept, guards patrolled, and the wind whispered through the tents. Yet even in sleep, the camp's awareness of Daniel's capability persisted. The legend was only beginning, and tomorrow promised a test that would truly reveal the measure of his skill, courage, and discipline. By the early hours of morning, the camp was silent. Only the moon illuminated the tents and the faint traces of the day's dust. Private Daniels, the clerk, lay in quiet repose, readying himself in his mind for the challenges ahead. Around him, the soldier's awe had solidified into something more profound, a deep, cautious respect, tempered by the knowledge that this ordinary-looking man might very well determine the outcome of the next mission. And so, the night passed with anticipation and tension. The camp settled under a blanket of quiet reflection. The clerk had proven himself, not with words or fanfare, but with a single, extraordinary act. And in doing so, he had altered the dynamics of the camp forever. By the first light of dawn, the soldiers would awaken not just to another day, but to the reality that they had witnessed the emergence of someone extraordinary, someone quiet, controlled, and devastatingly capable. Asterisk. The camp stirred quietly under the dim light of dawn. Mist rolled in from the hills surrounding the outpost, clinging to tents and equipment like a living, whispering shroud. Soldiers moved silently, boots crunching softly on the damp earth as they prepared for the day ahead. There was an unspoken tension in the air, one born not of routine drills, but of anticipation, fear, and awe. All knew something significant was about to unfold. General Harris emerged from the command tent, his uniform crisp despite the previous day's chaos. He walked slowly toward the formation, hands clasped behind his back, gaze scanning every soldier. The camp held its breath. Whispers ceased. Even the wind seemed to pause in respect. "Men," Harris began, voice low but carrying across the yard, "we have received intelligence of enemy scouts positioned in the hills beyond our perimeter. Their presence is confirmed, their intentions unclear. They have the capacity to disrupt our supply lines and jeopardize the safety of this camp." A murmur rippled through the soldiers. The word enemy carried weight, but the unknown details carried heavier fear. Harris continued, "A reconnaissance team must confirm these positions. If possible, the threat must be neutralized before it escalates." He paused, letting the weight of the responsibility settle on every man present. This is a mission requiring precision, courage, and discretion. It is not for the faint of heart. Lives depend on the decisions made tonight. The formation tightened instinctively. Soldiers exchanged nervous glances, some swallowing hard. As the implications settled in, they understood the risk immediately. Scouts in the hills meant ambushes, traps, and exposure. Every man knew the likelihood of danger was high. Harris' gaze lingered on Private Daniels. The clerk stood at the back of the formation, calm as ever, eyes steady, hands resting lightly at his sides. Harris had observed him constantly since the demonstration. He had seen fear in many soldiers. He had seen panic, hesitation, bravado, arrogance, but Daniels exhibited none of it. The clerk radiated calm, a quiet certainty that unsettled even the hardened general. "You," Harris said, stepping closer. To Daniels, "You will lead the reconnaissance. Your skills are unparalleled. You have proven that calm, precision, and courage can outweigh brute force. The mission depends on that ability." Daniels inclined his head, expression neutral. "Understood, sir," he replied. No hesitation, no question, no arrogance, just acceptance. Around him, the soldiers whispered among themselves, eyes flicking nervously between the general and Daniels. The man who had filed papers quietly, polished boots in silence, and moved, unseen through the camp, was now assigned to a mission that could determine the fate of the entire outpost. The whispers grew. Admiration, fear, and disbelief tangled together. A veteran sergeant muttered quietly to his companion, "I've never seen anyone carry that kind of responsibility with such calm. He's untouchable in focus." Reynolds, the young private who had asked about Daniel's background, leaned closer to a friend. "Do you think he's scared at all?" He whispered. "No," the other replied. "I think he's ready. I don't know how, but he is." Harris continued, giving more detail of the mission. "You will move under cover of darkness. The hills are rugged, rocky, and unforgiving. Enemy scouts are armed and vigilant. Detection could mean death, not only for you but for the rest of the camp. Success requires observation, discretion, and decisive action if confrontation is unavoidable." Daniels' expression remained unchanged, but his mind catalogued every detail. He memorized the layout of the hills, the potential positions of the scouts, and the terrain's obstacles. Every risk factor became a calculation, every shadow a potential path or threat. To him, this was simply another challenge requiring focus, preparation, and precision. As the briefing concluded, Harris' voice lowered, directed only at Daniels. "I am placing this responsibility in your hands. Failure is not an option. You must return with confirmation of positions, or the consequences will be severe." Daniels inclined his head once more. "I understand, sir." The general studied him, eyes narrowing slightly. He did not doubt Daniels' ability, but he knew unpredictability was part of war. He could not control the outcome, only the preparation. "You will move immediately," Harris said. "Do not underestimate the enemy. The hills conceal more than their presence. Be ready for anything." The soldiers watched as Daniels moved to gather his gear. Unlike others who might have fussed or double-checked nervously, he packed methodically, efficiently, with a rhythm that suggested this had been done countless times before. Every strap fastened, every blade checked, every pouch counted, all with an economy of motion that exuded confidence without arrogance. Some soldiers muttered among themselves, eyes following every step. "How can he be so calm?" one asked. "He's walking into danger and doesn't even flinch." A sergeant shook his head slowly. "That's not flinch. That's control, discipline. He knows what he can handle and what he can't. That kind of control is rare, deadly rare." Daniels adjusted his glasses, securing the last of his small equipment. His movements were precise, economical, unhurried. Yet the air around him seemed to pulse with quiet authority, a presence that commanded attention even without a word. Soldiers instinctively gave him space, as if the very act of crowding him might disrupt some invisible rhythm of readiness. Harris walked alongside him briefly, keeping pace as they approached the perimeter of the camp. "The hills are unforgiving," he said quietly, voice low. "Keep your wits about you. Scouts are not the only threat." "I will, sir," Daniels replied, tone even. The general allowed a rare, subtle nod, a silent acknowledgement of respect. Though he maintained authority, he understood that Daniels' calm, measured approach made him uniquely suited for the task. Harris had faced countless soldiers who were brash, arrogant, or frightened. Daniels was none of these. He was quiet, disciplined, and unervingly precise. The other soldiers watched as Daniels moved into the shadows near the edge of the perimeter. Mist curled around his boots, rising from the damp earth like smoke. He paused once, surveying the hills in the distance. The rocky slopes, dotted with low shrubs and treacherous paths, stretched for miles. Enemy positions were rumored to be scattered among them, and the possibility of traps or ambushes made the terrain even more hazardous. Daniels inhaled deeply, centering himself. Each breath was controlled, each movement deliberate. His mind catalogued every detail: the slope of the hills, the positions of potential sentries, the paths that could be taken without leaving a trace. He was ready. The soldiers watching him fell silent, some shifting uncomfortably. This was more than courage. Was focus, mastery over fear. They could only imagine the discipline it must have taken to remain so calm in the face of the unknown. Daniel stepped forward into the night, blending with the shadows, moving with the quiet efficiency of a trained hunter. His boots made no sound against the damp earth. Every muscle was coiled, every nerve alert. He was a shadow, a whisper, a force that had yet to reveal its full measure. From the edge of the camp, General Harris watched silently, noting every movement. He did not intervene, did not speak. He merely observed, aware that the success of the mission now rested in the hands of the quiet clerk, who had just become the camp's most formidable presence. As Daniels disappeared into the darkness, the soldiers felt a mixture of awe, fear, and hope. He was no longer just a clerk. He was a symbol of courage, discipline, and the quiet power that could tip the balance in ways none of them had anticipated. The night was alive with possibilities, danger lurking in every shadow of the hills. And yet, as Daniels moved through the mist and darkness, he carried nothing but precision, skill, and calm, ready to face whatever lay ahead. By the time the camp settled into uneasy rest, the legend of Daniels had grown further. The clerk had stepped into the unknown, unflinching, composed, and prepared to do what none of the others could. And in the quiet hills beyond the perimeter, the mission had truly begun. The hills loomed ahead, jagged and shadowed in the silver light of pre-dawn. Mist clung to the rocky slopes, curling around shrubs and low outcroppings like smoke rising from a hidden fire. Every sound was amplified: the distant call of a bird, the crunch of loose stone beneath Daniel's boots, the faint whisper of wind through the sparse grass. Daniels paused at the base of the first incline, adjusting the strap of his pack and checking the small arsenal he carried. Every tool, every knife, every piece of gear had been accounted for, packed with the precision of someone whose life depended on meticulous preparation. The hills held danger, yes, but for Daniels, danger was measured, calculated, and neutralized before it could strike. He climbed slowly, deliberately, placing his feet on the most stable rocks, feeling every shift beneath him. The mist clung to him, hiding his movements even as it obscured the path. He moved like a shadow, almost intangible, his thin frame blending seamlessly into the hills. Below, the camp stirred. Soldiers whispered anxiously in the pre-dawn darkness. Some huddled near the perimeter, trying to catch a glimpse of Daniels. As he disappeared into the hills, every movement in the shadows was amplified in their imagination. "Do you think he'll make it?" Reynolds asked, voice tense. Sergeant Wilkins shook his head. "He's calm," That's what makes him dangerous. The rest of us would panic, make noise, give ourselves away. Not him. He's methodical, precise, unflinching. The general stood silently at the edge of the camp, eyes fixed on the dark outline of Daniels moving up the hill. His mind catalogued every possibility. Hidden scouts, traps, loose rock, sudden encounters. Harris had commanded many men, seen many brave soldiers, but none like Daniels. The calm, measured precision was unnerving, almost otherworldly. As Daniels reached the first ridge, he crouched low, scanning the area with sharp, calculating eyes. Faint movement in the mist caught his attention. A pair of enemy scouts patrolling a narrow path below. They were armed, vigilant, unaware of the figure observing them from above. Daniels assessed the situation, the distance, the terrain, the potential routes for approach and retreat. Every detail registered. A low exhale of breath, and he descended silently along a concealed path, positioning himself directly above the scouts. From this vantage, he could see their patterns, one leaning occasionally to peer through binoculars, the other shifting nervously, weapon ready. Timing was everything. A misstep could expose him, ruin the mission, and cost lives. Daniels adjusted his stance, weight balanced, breathing controlled. In one fluid motion, he dropped to a lower ledge, moving along the shadowed hillside like a wisp of air. The scouts' conversation drifted upward faintly through the mist, unaware of the presence above them. Back at the camp, the soldiers waited, tension crackling like static. Every sound from the hills was imagined amplified danger. "He's going to be seen," one muttered. "I don't know how he does it." Sergeant Wilkins remained silent, eyes fixed on the hills. "He doesn't rush. He observes. He waits. And then he acts." Daniels observed the scouts for several tense minutes, memorizing patrol routes, noting every concealed path, every likely point of ambush. Then, in a single calculated movement, he crept closer, careful to remain hidden in shadow. His approach was quiet, invisible. Within arm's reach, he halted, eyes narrowing as he assessed distance and timing. A subtle gesture, and the scouts shifted positions unaware of the danger overhead. Daniel's hands moved swiftly, tying one into a silent submission, then the other. Within moments, both were immobilized, unconscious, and completely hidden from view in the mist-shrouded hillside. Daniels exhaled softly, muscles relaxing slightly. He had successfully neutralized the immediate threat, but the hills held more traps. Observation points, perhaps additional scouts. He could not linger. Every step now was measured for reconnaissance, documenting positions and estimating strength. He climbed higher, reaching a rocky outcropping that provided a wide view of the surrounding hills. From this vantage, he could see the enemy camp below. Tents partially concealed by vegetation, figures moving silently between them. He took note of locations, numbers, and positions, committing everything to memory and sketching subtle marks in a small notebook. The sun began to rise, spilling pale gold across the hills. Daniels paused briefly, observing the terrain. Paths that seemed simple from below were treacherous from above. He noted every ridge, every loose stone, every shadow that could conceal a threat or provide cover. His movements were deliberate, methodical, efficient. Back in the camp, Harris adjusted his position, still observing from a distance. He knew Daniels would return with information or fail entirely. Every nerve in the general's body was alert. Though outwardly he remained composed. Soldiers whispered again, glancing at the hills with a mixture of fear and fascination. Daniels descended carefully, making his way toward the edge of the enemy encampment. He moved with stealth, blending with the shadows, never breaking cover. A few sentries patrolled the perimeter, alert but unaware of his presence. Daniels timed his movements perfectly, slipping between patrols with the ease of someone who had trained for years in silence and observation. By mid-morning, Daniels had gathered all the information he needed: positions of enemy scouts, weak points in the perimeter, probable patrol schedules, and areas that required caution. He had cataloged every detail with precision, leaving nothing to chance. He moved back toward the ridge that overlooked the camp, retracing his path with equal care, ensuring he left no trace behind. Finally, he descended the last slope and approached the edge of the camp under the cover of early morning mist. Soldiers spotted him first, their whispers rising in awe. Daniels moved calmly, silently returning from the hills, carrying knowledge that could alter the outcome of the mission entirely. General Harris stepped forward, watching intently. "Report," he said quietly. Daniels handed over the notebook, outlining positions, patrols, and potential hazards. His voice was calm, measured, every word precise. "Enemy scouts positioned here," he said, pointing to specific locations. "Weak points here. Movement patterns indicate shifts every 3 hours. Sentries are alert, but predictable. Engagement is possible if required, but stealth is preferred." Harris scanned the notes, eyes narrowing with satisfaction and a growing sense of respect. "Excellent work," he said. "You have confirmed what we suspected and more. The hills are mapped, the threat understood. This will save lives." Soldiers gathered around, staring at Daniels with awe. Some whispered, others shook their heads in disbelief. "I don't know how he does it," one muttered. He walked into the hills alone and came back unscathed and with full intel. Sergeant Wilkins nodded slowly. "That's why he's different. Calm, precise, untouchable in focus. He's more than a soldier, he's the edge we need." Daniels returned to his tent quietly, securing his equipment, checking supplies, and preparing for the next phase. He had completed the reconnaissance flawlessly, yet there was no celebration, no overt acknowledgement. His work was never about recognition. It was about precision, discipline, and preparation for the challenges still to come. The camp remained abuzz with discussion. Soldiers compared Daniels' method to their own, imagining how such control and skill could influence the mission. Some doubted they would ever achieve such composure. Others felt inspired, realizing the potential impact of discipline, calm, and observation in the field. General Harris observed quietly from his tent, reflecting on Daniels' abilities. He had expected competence, but had witnessed extraordinary skill and composure under pressure. The clerk, the quiet, unassuming figure, had emerged not only as a capable operative, but as someone whose presence could determine the outcome of the most critical missions. By evening, the camp settled, but the story of Daniels' reconnaissance had already spread. The clerk had ventured into the unknown, navigated enemy positions with precision, and returned unscathed, bringing knowledge that would shape the mission ahead. Soldiers whispered, veterans nodded knowingly, and the general planned for the next step with confidence that Daniels' abilities would be crucial. Daniels, as always, remained calm. He organized his equipment, reviewed his notes, and prepared for the next phase. His presence had shifted the dynamics of the camp, instilling awe, respect, and cautious hope. The mission was far from over, but one man had already proven he could tip the balance in ways none had anticipated. And as night fell over the outpost once more, Daniels rested briefly, ready to step again into the unknown, while the camp slept uneasy but confident, knowing that their quiet clerk had become their most formidable asset. Asterisk. The hills lay dark under the heavy blanket of night. Mist clung to every crevice, curling around rocks and shrubs like smoke from a hidden fire. The reconnaissance had confirmed the enemy scouts' positions, but the real challenge had just begun. Daniels adjusted the strap of his pack, checked his knives, and took a slow, controlled breath. Every step from here on would be precise, measured, and decisive. Behind him, a small team of soldiers followed at a distance. They had been briefed on the reconnaissance, carrying Daniel's notes, but few had ever witnessed his calm, almost unnatural composure. Their whispers had ceased long ago, replaced by taut concentration and silent admiration. The first obstacle appeared almost immediately, a narrow pass guarded by 2 sentries. Daniels crouched low, observing their patrol patterns. One shifted slightly, adjusting the strap of his rifle, while the other scanned the darkness, eyes sharp. Daniels moved with ghost-like precision, timing every step with their rotations. Within moments, he slipped past the guards, shadows consuming him. The soldiers behind him followed, keeping tight, silent formation, their own fear suppressed by the confidence Daniels exuded. As they moved deeper into the hills, Daniels noted every ridge, every path, every potential trap. The enemy had positioned themselves to control the area, but Daniels had anticipated their strategy. His knowledge, combined with his calculated movements, allowed the team to navigate the terrain unseen. Suddenly, a faint sound, a snapping twig, alerted the sentries nearby. Daniels froze, listening, analyzing. One sentry had stepped off the expected path. Time seemed to stretch as Daniels calculated. With a subtle hand gesture, he signaled the team to halt. In a single fluid motion, he neutralized the threat, moving so quickly that the sentry never had a chance to react. The team pressed on, tension building with each step. Every rock, every shadow could conceal danger. But Daniel's calm presence guided them, instilling confidence even in the most nervous soldiers. They followed without question, their faith in his skill absolute. Hours passed as they navigated the hills, drawing ever closer to the enemy's main encampment. Daniels scouted ahead, identifying patrol routes, weak points, and areas requiring careful observation. Each movement was precise, silent, and controlled. The soldiers marveled at his ability to remain calm under conditions that would have paralyzed most men with fear. Finally, they reached the edge of the enemy camp. From this vantage point, Daniels observed their numbers, weapon placements, and the layout of tents. He noted the patrol patterns with meticulous detail, committing everything to memory. The mission's success depended on their ability to move undetected, and Daniel's calculations were flawless. A hushed whisper from a young private reminded Daniels of the stakes. "Sir, what if we're seen?" Daniels didn't flinch. "We won't be," he said simply, his voice calm but resolute. "Follow my lead. Trust your training. Trust your focus. Timing is everything." With deliberate movements, he led the team into position. Shadows became allies, darkness a shield. Every footfall was measured, every motion calculated. The enemy. Scouts were unaware of their presence, the hills concealing the team's approach perfectly. Then, without warning, a sentry turned sharply, catching a glimpse of movement. Daniels reacted instantly, neutralizing the threat with precision. The rest of the team followed his lead, moving as one, silent and deadly. Within moments, the area was secured, the enemy unaware of how close they had come to disaster. Daniels signaled the team to advance. They moved swiftly, silently, disabling communications and gathering intelligence as planned. Every step reinforced the lesson. Calm, controlled precision outweighed brute force. The enemy, confident in their dominance, never saw the shadow passing through their midst. Hours later, the team had completed the mission objectives. Enemy positions were documented, communications disabled, and the threat neutralized. Daniels led the group back to the edge of the hills, retracing their steps with the same careful precision. Every movement accounted for, every potential danger avoided. By the time they returned to the camp, the first light of dawn was breaking. Over the hills, soldiers emerged from tents, eyes wide with awe as they saw Daniels and his team return unscathed, bearing proof of their success. The whisper of the night's events spread quickly. The quiet clerk had led a reconnaissance, neutralized threats, and returned with precise intelligence that could determine the survival of the entire camp. General Harris stepped forward, his expression a mixture of relief and admiration. He studied Daniels closely, noting the calm, unshakable demeanor that had guided the team through danger. "Private Daniels," he said quietly, "you have done what I feared could not be done. You have led your team with precision, courage, and skill beyond anything I imagined." Daniels inclined his head slightly. "The mission was completed, sir," he said. "No lives were lost, and the enemy positions are documented. That was the objective." The general's gaze swept across the soldiers, noting their expressions of awe and relief. "Let this be a lesson," Harris said, voice carrying over. "The camp, discipline, focus, and courage can achieve what brute force cannot. Today, we have witnessed that firsthand." Soldiers gathered around Daniels, some shaking his hand, others nodding respectfully. Even those who had doubted his abilities now acknowledged his extraordinary skill. He had become a symbol of calm, precise action in the face of danger, a living example of how discipline and preparation could triumph over fear and uncertainty. Sergeant Wilkins, observing quietly, muttered to a nearby soldier, "I've served with men who were fearless, but few had the control this man possesses. He's not just brave, he's untouchable in focus." Daniels returned to his tent quietly, methodically securing his equipment and reviewing the intelligence collected during the mission. To him, this was routine, a completion of tasks with precision. Yet the impact of his actions resonated throughout the camp, altering perceptions of courage, skill, and leadership. The general, still observing, made a private note of Daniels' effectiveness. In his decades of service, he had rarely seen such controlled efficiency. Daniels had not only executed the mission flawlessly, but had instilled confidence and awe in every soldier who followed him. Harris realized that the clerk, once overlooked, had become indispensable. As evening fell over the camp, a sense of calm settled among the soldiers. They had witnessed something extraordinary, a demonstration of skill, courage, and precision that would be recounted for years. Daniels had transformed the perception of what one quiet, disciplined individual could accomplish. Around the campfire that night, soldiers whispered stories of Daniels' stealth, precision, and unflappable calm. Young recruits listened in awe, veterans nodded knowingly, and even the general allowed a faint smile, acknowledging the rare combination of skill and focus he had witnessed firsthand. Daniels sat quietly, the firelight reflecting in his glasses. He had completed the mission, ensured the safety of the camp, and demonstrated the power of calm precision. Yet he said nothing of heroics. There were no boasts, no claims of glory, only the quiet satisfaction of a task completed with excellence. By the time night fully settled over the hills, the camp slept, a sense of accomplishment and respect lingering in the cool air. Private Daniels, the quiet clerk, had become more than a figure of ordinary service. He had become a legend, a man whose calm, precise actions could change the course of events and whose skill had saved countless lives. General Harris, observing from his tent, made one final note in his mind. In all his years of command, he had never encountered such a combination of composure, skill, and precision. Daniels was no ordinary soldier, no ordinary clerk. He was a force of calculated excellence, a quiet shadow whose impact was undeniable. As the camp settled into silence, Daniels prepared for whatever came next. The mission was complete, but the challenges of war were never-ending. Yet one truth was clear. In the hills, in the shadows, in moments of uncertainty, Daniel's calm and precise presence had proven invaluable. He had earned the respect of every soldier and the admiration of the general, and his legend would endure, quietly, in the hearts and minds of those who had witnessed his extraordinary abilities.